The narrative begins by telling us that in the year 2015, scientists Jonas and Tim traveled to Bolivia under a mission from the Department of Defense, investigating rumors of a man who is 250 years old, who could be the key to finding an unlimited remedy. Following a local guide, the team arrives at a mysterious cave where the guide tells them to wait while he takes a bucket of blood to the mystical man who is in a cage. Tim ignores him and approaches anyway, giving the creature the opportunity to attack him. The guards try to stop him with bullets, but they do not work, so Agent Clark tries a stake he finds nearby, effectively killing the vampire. After that, Tim is taken to a hospital, but he recovers instantly and declares that he can transform the world before spitting out his own teeth. 3 years later, agents Brad and Phil go to a state prison to offer death row inmate Anthony the opportunity to be a patient in a government project called Noah. Anthony is suspicious, but Brad convinces him by highlighting that he can use his own life to save others instead of wasting it in prison. At the Noah facility, Jonas is the leader of the team of scientists conducting the project, including doctors Nicole and Daniel. Their goal is to find the cure for the avian flu, which is killing billions of people. When Daniel presents a theory, he takes the team to Sector 4B, a quarantined area that houses Tim and other test subjects recruited from death row. Since the incident in Bolivia, Tim has become a vampire, and the same happened to each subject who received the same virus from his blood. They are immune to all diseases, but also extremely dangerous. Daniel emphasizes that they are all failures because of their age and that the next experiment must be a child, and Nicole agrees in the name of the greater good, then asks Clark to send some agents to locate an orphan. Meanwhile, in Memphis, young Amy spends time alone reading her favorite book. When she returns home, she finds the police there and immediately concludes that her mother died of an overdose. Since she has no relatives, Amy is placed in foster care. Sometime later, Brad and Phil take Anthony to the Noah facility, and Clark immediately assigns them a new mission. The duo drives to Memphis and visits the foster home where Amy is living, and as soon as Amy meets the agents, she becomes suspicious of their intentions. When she is sent upstairs to get her things, Amy escapes through the window. Brad notices and remains silent because he does not want to kidnap a child, but Phil also notices, so both get into the car and chase Amy through the city. They find her at the park, and when the girl defends herself with a kick, Phil responds by hitting her. Then he throws her into the back seat of the car to get away from witnesses. A few blocks later, Brad stops the vehicle and hits Phil, threatening something worse if he hurts Amy again. Then Brad comforts Amy and assures her that she is not hurt, but she remains afraid of him. Back in Sector 4B, Supervisor Gray informs Jonas that he and many staff members have had very realistic nightmares about Tim, but Jonas dismisses it as confinement fever. Daniel and Clark inspect inmate Shauna, and while Daniel states that the subjects are no longer productive, Clark cannot avoid a disturbing feeling when looking at her. At feeding time, a sink is filled with blood, and Shauna approaches to drink while maintaining eye contact with Clark. Later, Nicole returns to the room and finds Clark waiting. The two become involved, but in the middle of the act, Clark suddenly sees Shauna in place of Nicole. Shauna accuses Clark of lying before revealing her vampiric face to him, but at that moment Clark wakes up. Returning to Amy, she notices that there is an amusement park nearby, and Brad offers to take her. Phil reminds Brad that the girl is just a mission, but Brad ignores him and has fun with Amy, allowing them to bond. Suddenly, Brad receives a call from his ex-wife Lila, who explains that she is considering getting married again. However, she asks if Brad wants to try to reconcile, but the weight of their daughter's death is still unbearable, and Brad ends the call. Thinking about his daughter leads Brad to make a decision, and he follows Phil to the bathroom, where he attacks him by surprise and leaves him unconscious. They steal another car, and after driving for a few hours, Brad takes Amy to a lake so she can properly say goodbye to her mother and face her grief, which Amy appreciates. When news of Brad's escape reaches Noah, Clark is sent to find him. Meanwhile, Anthony is examined by Tim, who at first appears human, but soon begins to transform into his vampiric form. He promises Anthony that things will get worse, but that he will be by his side to help him. Then Tim growls and Anthony wakes from the nightmare. Sometime later, Brad stops at a gas station and sees his own face on the news because he is now wanted. Thus, he uses a payphone to try to warn Lila about Clark. It turns out that Clark is already there, so Lila pretends to receive a call from a patient to give him a clue. Brad understands and declares his love before hanging up, and Lila informs Clark that she has had no news from Brad. Upon returning to the car, Brad notices a sheriff approaching and decides to surrender, because it will be safer for Amy if she becomes known. After Brad turns himself in, he and Amy are taken to the police department. However, Brad regrets it when he hears that the officers are in contact with the Department of Defense. While the sheriff is distracted, Amy sneaks behind the counter and grabs the handcuff keys to free Brad. At that moment, Clark and his men arrive. Then Brad grabs a gun from the sheriff just before the agents enter and kill the poor man. Brad immediately reacts and eliminates some before fighting another hand-to-hand. At the exit, the duo encounters Clark, who hesitates to shoot his best friend. Brad takes advantage and shoots a fire extinguisher, forcing Clark to retreat. Then he grabs Amy and steals a patrol car to escape. Amy notices that Brad is wounded and that the agents are following them, but Brad assures her that everything will be fine and turns on the sirens to cross an intersection, causing an accident that blocks Clark. A few miles later, they see a school bus about to leave for a trip, so Brad pulls over and pretends that Amy is a new student who forgot her documents. Amy is allowed to board and sits in the back to open the emergency exit and allow Brad to enter. A student tries to take a photo, but Brad takes the device. Sometime later, Brad and Amy leave in another stolen car, but Brad suffers from blood loss and stops before passing out. While Clark interrogates all the children on the bus and sends men to search for stolen cars, an agent begins to tap Lila's phone. Meanwhile, Amy uses Brad's phone to call Lila, who instructs Amy to check Brad's vital signs. After confirming that the bleeding has stopped, Amy presses on Brad's chest to wake him and hands him the phone. When Brad realizes what is happening, he angrily throws the device away, because he knows they can track the call. At Noah, Jonas injects Anthony with the serum and a chip in his neck to monitor vital signs and track his location in case he tries to escape. Anthony asks if Jonas has ever imagined experimenting on humans, and Jonas replies that he has not, but begins to reflect on the past. His wife Elizabeth had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and Jonas began working with Tim to search for a cure. When Jonas obtained proof of the existence of the 250-year-old man, he and Tim agreed to seek him out for the sake of research. Back to Amy and Brad. They arrive at a forest and cross it until they find an old house where Brad pulls a tripwire, triggering an alarm. A woman named Lacey appears with a gun in her hands, but lowers it upon recognizing her old friend. Lacey shows caution, but accepts the request for shelter when he begs. Meanwhile, Clark finds the broken phone on the road and orders his men to shoot Brad as soon as they locate him. At Noah, Jonas and Nicole analyze Anthony's results and discover that the old knee injury is already healing faster than any previous subject. This makes Jonas remember how Tim had become obsessed with the serum, and it was he who agreed to work with the Department of Defense because they would fund the research. Elizabeth believed they were violating the code of ethics, but Jonas thought curing her was more important. While Amy and Lacey strengthen their bond, Brad hears the alarm sound, but it is only Lila who knows Brad's hiding places. During dinner, Lacey informs Brad that she secured a boat and passports through a contact so he can leave for Canada, but also emphasizes that Noah will never stop chasing him because he knows too much, and they will probably kidnap another child to force a deal. Lacey offers to leak the story while Brad escapes with Amy, and Brad gives her the names of all the inmates he took from prison to Noah. After that, Lila takes care of Brad's wound and they reconcile. At the facility, Anthony is exercising when he suddenly hears loud music. He goes to investigate and enters a room that looks like a bar, where he finds Shauna and Tim, who advises him not to trust Jonas. They also try to share a cup of blood with him, and when Anthony refuses, Shauna shoves her hand into his mouth to prove that he is losing his teeth so the fangs can grow. When Anthony tries to leave, Tim gives him a message to pass on to Jonas before growling and making him wake up. The next time Anthony sees Jonas, he reports the dreams and delivers Tim's message, which states that the world has already been transformed and that it is necessary to wait to see how. After that, Jonas visits Elizabeth at the psychiatric hospital, but the advanced stage of the disease does not allow her to remember or understand anything. In cell 4B, the cleaning crew performs their duties and Gray watches Simmons provoking Shauna. Gray tries to warn him that it is dangerous, but Simmons responds by pushing him against the bars and kicking his badge inside. Terrified, Gray has no choice but to retrieve it, and he is surprised when Shauna does not attack as he puts his hand inside. Simmons interprets this as a sign of safety and tries to provoke her again, but this time Shauna grabs him through the bars and bites his neck, killing him. Meanwhile, Clark locates Lacey's contact and beats him until he confesses what he knows. The agents arrive at Lacey's house in the morning, so Brad and Lacey immediately open fire. Lacey is wounded in the confrontation, which leads Brad to agree to surrender while Lila tries to keep Amy away. However, Amy hears Clark say that he will kill Brad, so she decides to come out and surrender as well. While the agents take Brad and Amy, Clark remembers when he met Shauna. He found some men trying to abuse her, beat them and drove them away before calming her down. The two talked and became friends, and Clark promised that the test would not cause pain. Upon arriving at the facility, Amy and Brad are separated. Clark participates in a meeting to review the footage of Simmons's death, and the scientists conclude that Shauna is more human than they imagined, because she only attacked the one who disturbed her. Clark considers this a security risk, and declares that they must subject her to euthanasia, which Jonas authorizes. Then Nicole is called to evaluate Amy, who is aggressive and does not allow the nurses to examine her. Nicole explains that Amy could be the cure for thousands of people, so Amy agrees to help only if they allow Brad to stay with her. Clark brings Brad, and the doctor clarifies the severity of the avian flu. Thus, Brad agrees to cooperate as long as it is Amy's decision. Afterwards, Brad joins Amy and discovers that they have already implanted the chip in her. Nicole also applies the serum, which makes Tim sense the girl's presence. When a nurse returns later to check on Amy, Brad takes the opportunity to steal an injection from the cart. Later, both fall asleep, but Brad wakes up when he finds Gray in the room. The employee tries to warn him that Tim will go after Amy, but the conversation is interrupted by two guards who quickly separate them, and Brad takes the opportunity to grab a flashlight. Later, upon meeting Anthony, he hears about the nightmares with Tim. Meanwhile, Amy uses colored pencils to slide notes under the door that connects to Anthony's room. Anthony quickly replies, and the two become friends by constantly exchanging messages. In the late afternoon, Brad hears noises and leaves the room, noticing Gray taking the elevator. Brad follows him and uses the stolen injection to make him sleep. Upon reaching cell 4B, Brad unlocks it using Gray's eye and discovers the monstrous state of all the test subjects, feeling guilty for having brought them from prison. At that moment, Jonas catches Brad and explains that it is a side effect of the virus, but that they do it to save lives. Brad returns to the room and has a nightmare with Tim, who tells him to get out of the way. Meanwhile, Lila makes calls asking about the missing inmates, but everyone hangs up. Only someone from Shauna's former prison confirms that she did not die there, as was reported. The next day, Lila meets journalist Sierra and shares what she knows about the prisoners, and Sierra promises to investigate. A few hours later, in the hotel room she shares with Lacey. Lila receives a call from Sierra, confirming that there is something suspicious and that she will publish the story. Sometime later, Jonas realizes that Tim and Shauna are not feeding. It is then revealed that they meet when they arise in each other's minds, and Tim scolds Shauna for recklessness, telling her to use all her power to fix the situation. Following the advice, Shauna begins transmitting her story directly into Clark's mind. Years earlier, Shauna wanted to leave the small town, and whenever she went out with friends, she stole money from the bar to increase the savings she hid at home. The situation was terrible because her stepfather abused her, and one night she discovered that he had taken all the money. Shauna confronted the man, but her mother defended him against what she considered unjust accusations. Tired of hiding, Shauna told her mother what she was suffering, only to discover that she already knew and blamed her for provoking the aggressor. Devastated and furious upon realizing that her mother did not care, Shauna grabbed a knife and killed her, a crime that led her to death row. Upon seeing all of this, Clark initiates the euthanasia procedure as planned. First, she is sedated with gas, then she is taken to a special cell where intense lights begin to burn her. However, the story continues echoing in Clark's mind, and in the end, he feels compassion and cancels the procedure. The next day, Anthony wakes after another nightmare, this time involving his deceased girlfriend. Amy finds out and fears what might happen to her, so Brad calls the doctors and requests that Amy have some time outside the room to preserve her mental health. After hesitation, Nicole agrees, as long as guards accompany them. Amy plays outside, and Brad gets a better view of the exterior to map out a plan. Meanwhile, Clark begins seeing Shauna in his own mind all the time. She appears kind and grateful, but also warns him that a soldier is going insane. Shortly after she disappears, Clark is notified that a man is displaying strange behavior. Clark rushes over and discovers that Paulson saw the past of the vampire Winston just as Clark saw Shauna's, and he believes the humans are becoming the vampire's guinea pigs. During the daily consultation, Anthony admits to Jonas that the nightmares have worsened and that Tim said he must make a choice, but he does not understand which one. Jonas states that Anthony is the best subject among the others because he has not shown side effects and that the dreams may come from guilt over his girlfriend's death. After Jonas leaves, Anthony recalls the first time he met Rachel. She taught him how to be a better broker, and the two grew closer, starting a relationship. The thoughts are interrupted when he receives a note from Amy, but before replying, he spits blood and realizes he is losing teeth. Meanwhile, Lila and Lacey meet with Sierra, who shows the prepared report. She explains that it will air at 5 in the afternoon and that dangerous people are involved, so they must hide. However, when the time comes and they turn on the television, instead of the report they see an announcement that Sierra is dead. Lila concludes that the journalist was killed for knowing too much, and she and Lacey decide to leave immediately, choosing a church led by a friend of Lacey to hide. Later, while Lila prays alone, a stranger surprises her from behind and takes her away. At Noah, Jonas notices that Tim's brainwaves are higher than ever, and when the nurses check on Anthony, they find him collapsing with an extremely high fever. He is taken to the doctors, who decide to apply a new formula. Outside, Amy picks up binoculars and identifies a sniper on the roof. Brad pushes her at the moment the shot is fired, revealing Paulson. Clark and his men immediately go out and exchange gunfire with Paulson, while Brad and Amy move through the forest. When the agents draw the sniper's attention, the duo runs to take shelter with Clark. At that moment, Paulson hits the power substation and leaves the entire facility without electricity. Clark is ordered to resolve it quickly because the machines are needed to save Anthony, and Brad offers his negotiation skills to talk to Paulson. Anthony is placed in a container with ice to contain the extreme fever, but he does not wake and continues dreaming about Rachel. The memory is interrupted by Tim, who taunts him while Jonas monitors Anthony's vital signs. He concludes that Tim is accelerating the mutation. Amy is also worried about Anthony, and Shauna suddenly appears in her mind to talk about the changes they are going through. She shows Amy her true face and explains that this will happen to Anthony and to Amy as well, but Amy refuses to accept that she is a monster. On the roof, Brad reaches the top and talks to Paulson, who confesses that he already smuggled a vial with Tim's blood and hid it, so they cannot kill him if they want to know where it is. Brad says he is on his side and that he wants to shut down Noah as well, mentioning the dreams and what he saw in 4B. Paulson gives in and explains that the vampires can control them, mentioning what Shauna made Clark do. However, just as he is about to say more, Paulson is shot by Clark, who claims that the smuggled vial was a lie and questions Brad's loyalty. Brad pretends he was only bluffing to make Paulson talk. Back to Anthony. The next memory he sees is the night Rachel showed up with injuries on her face. It is discovered that she was married and that her husband hurt her, so Anthony had always been her escape. Anthony felt betrayed, but still allowed her to stay the night for her safety. However, when he woke up the next day, he found Rachel dead in the pool, probably murdered by her husband, but Anthony was blamed for it and sent to prison. At that moment, the power returns and the doctors rush to save Anthony, but it is too late. Tim appears in Anthony's mind and taunts him by reminding him that the system failed him when they trusted the rich white man more than the poor black man. Anthony always lacked power to have a better life, and Tim can offer that to him. Desperate to survive, Anthony gives in and allows the mutation to take control of his body, becoming a vampire who begins attacking the nurses in the room. Jonas tries to help and is pushed away. Then Nicole drags him into another room, only to discover that Jonas has possibly dangerous blood on his face. Sometime later, Director Gilder from the Department of Defense goes to Noah to check the recent problems. Brad sees him through the window and does not like where this is heading, so he and Amy agree that they must escape, while Gilder tells Clark he wants to talk to Amy without Brad nearby. Jonas asks Nicole to place him in isolation until they are sure he is not infected. After that, Nicole and Daniel give Gilder a report of what has been happening, mentioning the fact that the vampires seem to be telepathically connected to one another. Nicole is worried about how dangerous the project is becoming and asks to terminate all subjects except Amy, who has shown good results. However, Gilder refuses because the potential telepathic powers mean that this could become a powerful weapon, and finding the cure for the avian flu can be left to other laboratories the government is already working with. Nicole complains because that is not what she signed up for, but Daniel is willing to develop a method to control the vampires. During lunch, Brad and Amy review the escape plan, and Amy accidentally finishes Brad's sentences. Brad realizes that Amy can now read minds and advises her to keep it secret. The conversation is interrupted by Clark and the guards, who take Brad away so Amy can talk to Gilder. Nicole refuses to leave Amy alone with Gilder and joins the meeting, feeling proud of Amy when she calls Gilder a bad man. Gilder wonders if Amy can read his mind, and Amy denies it before Nicole announces the meeting is over. Afterwards, Nicole tells Amy that she does not trust Gilder and wants to set her free, so the girl tells her about the plan. Brad is kept handcuffed in a room and suddenly begins dreaming of Anthony, who tells Brad that Gilder wants to turn Amy into a weapon. Outseal. Daniel takes Winston out of the cell for an experiment, during which he uses a machine to connect his mind to the vampires. Daniel appears in Winston's mind, and the vampire begins to taunt him, but Daniel focuses and uses the connection to make Winston's body move against his will, proving that they can control the vampires. Gilder is called for a demonstration, but when Daniel tries to control Winston again, nothing happens. In 4B, Tim continues staring at Jonas, making him imagine that he is visiting Elizabeth. Tim also shares the memory of a night when the three of them had dinner together. Jonas was too busy with a speech, so Tim offered to take Elizabeth home. He used the opportunity to say that he loved her, and they ended up kissing. Afterwards, Tim appears in Jonas's mind to scold him for not curing Elizabeth in time, before entering Elizabeth's mind, where he begins eliminating the Alzheimer's. Back to Nicole. She frees Brad and takes him to the blood cooling room where Amy is hiding. They will have to wait there for Nicole's signal, and because of her developing powers, Amy does not feel the cold. She also confesses that she is hearing many thoughts. Clark discovers that Amy is missing, and Shauna appears in his mind to tell him where to find her, because the vampires want Amy to remain. At that moment, the staff enter the cooling room and see Amy, so Brad immediately knocks them out. Now that they have been seen, they can no longer wait and flee without noticing that Amy drops her cherished book. Meanwhile, Daniel wants to try again with Winston, but even before connecting the machine, Winston appears in his mind. It is revealed that the machine never worked and that Winston was pretending so they would take him out of the cell. Winston begins controlling Daniel to make him turn off the lights and free him from the restraints, then chases him to 4B, where he kills him right in front of Jonas before escaping. Tim appears in Jonas's mind to say that he is not infected, but this time Jonas reacts by saying that he already knew about the kiss because Elizabeth confessed she made a mistake and they worked on their relationship to move forward. But Tim clearly never got over it and still harbors bitterness for having lost. Tim claims that he did not lose. Jonas demands to be freed, then immediately runs to the room where he finds Elizabeth waiting for him completely cured. There is a serum injection nearby, implying that she was also infected. Brad and Amy try to escape through the emergency tunnels, only to find the path blocked by Winston, who immediately jumps on Brad. When the vampire is about to kill him, Amy screams so loudly that she pushes Winston away before fainting. When she wakes minutes later, she is trapped in an elevator with Brad, who reminds her not to tell anyone about her powers, while Clark forces the elevator open to save them. Nicole shows Gilder Daniel's body to make him shut down the project, but he still refuses. Shauna uses the opportunity to contact Nicole's mind, reminding her of the time they met and how Nicole agreed to bring movies so she would be less bored. They ended up watching together and became friends, especially when they connected because of the semicolon tattoos that indicated both had tried to end their own lives in the past. Meanwhile, all the agents are focused on tracking Winston, so Amy reveals that she has powers and can see inside his mind. Brad does not want her involved, but Amy changes his mind by pointing out that she wants to stop Winston from hurting more people. In the middle of a road, the man transporting Lila stops the car when he sees a body and gets out to check. Suddenly, Winston jumps to attack him, so Lila uses the chance to hide in the forest. Moments later, the NOAA team arrives to check the bodies, and Brad finds Lila's wallet in the car, so he punches Clark for sending agents to kidnap his wife. At that moment, Amy has a vision of a cabin with an elderly woman and begins running through the forest to find it. At the cabin, Winston is feeding on the elderly woman and receives a mental visit from Tim to scold him for being reckless. Winston does not care about Tim's plan, but Tim warns that Amy is not on their side, so he must kill her if they want to survive. Winston flees just before Lila finds the cabin, and she tries to help the woman with her wounds. When the woman wakes hours later, all the scars have disappeared, but suddenly she transforms into a vampire and tries to attack Lila. However, at that moment the agents arrive and shoot her until she is pushed into the sunlight and dies. Brad rescues Lila, and Amy announces that she can see Winston at a pumping station. The team crosses the forest to find the correct building, and Brad tells Amy to wait outside while he enters with the agents. They encounter many workers who have been bitten and mutated, and as the team shoots them and loses some agents to surprise attacks, Winston runs outside and bites a guard as the sun begins to burn him. Amy realizes that he wants her, so she runs to make him chase her. She hides inside an abandoned building, and when Winston reaches her, she screams to make some furniture fall on him. Winston survives and continues chasing her, but fortunately Brad appears and takes him down after opening a door to let the sunlight in. As soon as Winston dies, all the transformed workers die as well. After that, Clark admits to Brad that he was right and promises to help him escape when he finds an opportunity. Gilder appears and makes Amy go with him, while Brad and Lila get into a car, but the couple is suddenly knocked unconscious. Back at the facility, Jonas and Elizabeth finish being intimate, and Elizabeth confesses that she saw Tim in her dreams. Jonas is forced to explain everything, which leaves Elizabeth upset and disgusted. Afterwards, Jonas tells Nicole that he checked the surveillance footage and discovered that it was Gray who injected Elizabeth with the virus, because apparently Tim is controlling him. Nicole also saw the footage and noticed Amy screaming and pushing Winston, which makes her think that she is more powerful than Tim and that they could use Amy's blood to combat Tim's control. While Nicole works on a cure, Shauna appears in her mind to accuse her of false promises and of all the people she killed with the experiments. When Nicole awakens from that trance, Jonas finds her and tells her about Elizabeth and Tim, so they agree that it is time to get rid of all the vampires. Jonas goes to 4B and turns on the ultraviolet lights to burn the vampires, but because they are all connected, it begins to hurt Elizabeth and Amy as well, so he is forced to turn them off. Moments later, Gilder and Nicole speak with the Secretary of Defense. Nicole still wants to shut down the project, but Gilder comments on all the powers they have discovered so far, and the Secretary allows them to continue. After that, Gilder meets with a man named Martinez, who had the original idea of using the vampires as weapons. Gilder thanks him for the guidance, and Martinez helps him even further by providing a list of NOAA employees he needs to replace with new and reliable people. Meanwhile, Jonas checks on Elizabeth, and when he shines a flashlight on her, she almost burns, confirming that she is slowly transforming as well. Brad is now dreaming of happy memories with his daughter, but when he wakes up, he discovers that he and Lila are trapped inside the trunk of a moving vehicle. Immediately, they grab the internal trunk wires and use them to loosen the restraints while talking about their daughter's memories. When Lila forgot to buy the markers the girl needed, Brad stopped at a convenience store where a robber suddenly burst in. Brad tried to negotiate with him, but the daughter came in looking for her father, and the frightened robber shot her. Upon realizing that his friend was missing, Clark asks Amy to use her powers to locate Brad, but she cannot see everything. Clark promises to find him and leaves, only for Amy to be visited next by Anthony, who telepathically shows her where her book is and takes the opportunity to press her to talk about her mother. Amy cries as she reveals that she feels responsible for her mother's death because they had an argument and Amy said she hated her, which probably led her to take an overdose to forget. Then Amy wakes up in the room while Gilder visits her. She asks about Brad, and Gilder tries to say that Brad chose to leave, but Amy does not believe him and states that Gilder is not in charge as he thinks. Speaking of Brad, the car finally stops and the agents pull him out. He pretends to still be handcuffed, but when he sees an opening, he fights the men and pushes one off a cliff before stealing a gun and shooting the other. After securing a weapon and a radio communicator, Brad and Lila begin walking away, and Brad finally makes a major confession. Clark had provided him with the robber's identity, so Brad found him and killed him out of revenge. After that, he felt like a monster, and that is why he had to leave Lila. However, Lila does not blame him. In fact, she also feels guilty because she forgot the markers in the first place. At that moment, Clark locates the abandoned car and uses a radio to contact his friend in order to warn him about agents approaching, but Clark does not think he can trust him. Moments later, they are found by another agent, but just as they are about to be killed, Clark appears and kills the man first. Clark swears that he is now on their side and hides Lila and Brad in the trunk to take them back. At Noah, Anthony visits Amy again to apologize for making her cry, but insists that she needs to explore her grief and accept that her mother does not blame her for anything. He also reminds her not to trust him. At this moment, Gilder begins installing extra security measures throughout the facility. Nicole informs Jonas that the cure is still not ready. Elizabeth is also fighting the mutation, and Tim continues appearing to her. However, she does not know whether she should choose between him or Jonas. Tim asks Elizabeth to choose soon, and Elizabeth chooses her husband, asking him to subject her to euthanasia before she becomes a monster. Jonas does so while holding her dying body. In the room, Amy practices using her powers and conjures an illusion of her house and her mother, who hugs her and promises that she does not blame her for anything, then hands her a box of matches, telling her to light her own path. At that moment, Brad and Lila arrive, but they cannot wake Amy because Tim now appears in her mind. While Tim tries to convince her to accept the change, the real body is taken to the emergency room, and Gilder forbids Nicole from accompanying her. After another brief meeting with Martinez, Gilder gathers most of the team and announces that the project is over and releases everyone to return home. Nicole and Clark agree that they need to save Amy, but the access permissions have been changed and they no longer have entry to the laboratories. Moments later, Amy manages to expel Tim from her mind and wakes up tied to a bed in 4B, where all the vampires stare at her. Meanwhile, Gilder is ambushed by Brad, Clark, Nicole, and Lila, and they force him to activate the elevator to take them to the laboratories. Clark stays behind to guard the door and notices on the tablet that Gray was not fired, so he asks the men to find him. The next scene shows a memory of his, from when Shauna once tried to escape the facility. She was frightened by nightmares about Tim, and to calm her, Clark took her to a restaurant. There they connected over their difficult childhoods and troubled parents, and Shauna asked him to run away with her. However, more agents arrived to take her back, making her feel betrayed by Clark. When the group reaches 4B, they disarm the guards by threatening Gilder, and Lila and Nicole return to working on the cure. Brad finds Amy and tries to free her, but she refuses because she thinks she is too dangerous now. After Tim sends another taunt into her mind, Amy wakes up and spits out her teeth. Clark checks the cameras and sees Gray entering the communication center, so he runs after him only to find him shutting down all communications. He is still under Tim's control and points out that Shauna also manipulates Clark. Then Clark asks Gilder for all the new codes, but Gilder says he does not have them either. He explains that the Department of Defense sent Martinez as an advisor and that he is the one who has the codes. Furious, Clark goes looking for him, searches most of the rooms, but does not find Martinez, and asks the guard at the main door about him. However, the guard swears there has never been a Martinez in the building. When the man makes a joke about ghosts, Clark understands the problem and returns to drag Gilder to 4B, where they discover that Martinez has been a vampire appearing in Gilder's mind the entire time. Moments later, Lila injects Amy with a new serum, hoping that it will at least slow the process. Clark meets with Brad, and they agree to fill the vampire's cells with a special gas to knock them out. Then Clark hands Brad Gray's badge before leaving to start evacuating the facility. Shauna appears in Clark's mind to ask for help, and Clark kisses her before explaining that he cared about the real Shauna, not the monster she is now. Meanwhile, Gray frees himself from his restraints by injuring himself and goes to the laboratories, where he finds Nicole finishing the cure and locks her in to prevent her from delivering it. Afterwards, Gray knocks Lila unconscious and finds Gilder to steal the badge. Tim approaches Amy again and hands her a bicycle before showing her the entrance to a tunnel she must cross to become more powerful. She begins pedaling through the tunnel, but then hears Brad speaking affectionately in real life and stops having a breakdown. Remembering the matches, she decides to light one and finds comfort in Brad's and her mother's advice. This makes her brave enough to turn around and leave the tunnel, leaving Tim behind. Amy suddenly wakes up, but all the other vampires also wake up. At that moment, Gray opens all the cages with Gilder's badge, and Brad quickly grabs Amy and Gilder to run down a corridor and close the door before the vampires reach them. When Amy turns around, she reveals yellow eyes and begins to see a memory of Tim in Bolivia, surrounded by soldiers inside a warehouse. Tim was feverish because of the virus and bleeding from the mouth. The villagers wanted the guards to kill him, and Tim thought it might be a good idea, but Jonas promised to help him and hired a helicopter to leave the country. When the vision ends, Amy controls the transformation and cancels the yellow eyes. Then she flees with Brad and Gilder. Clark wants to go down to help, but Gray blocked all the entrances. Brad finds Lila plus a doctor and 3 soldiers tied up, so they immediately free them while Brad tells Clark and Jonas what happened. Jonas believes they have lost Amy and that they should use the explosives installed in 4B for emergencies like that one. But Clark refuses because he wants to give Brad a chance first. While the group tries to free Nicole, Amy has another telepathic encounter with Tim, who is furious because Amy does not want to join him, but Amy pushes him away. At that moment, Clark announces that a technician is slowly replacing the system, but Gilder also notices that the vampires have suspiciously stopped pounding on the cell door. Suddenly the lights go out and Amy looks up to discover that the vampires are in the air, and the group starts running. Nicole says to blow up the place with her inside as soon as Amy is safe. While they run down the corridor, the vampires leap on them to attack, starting a fierce fight full of gunshots and bites. Anthony manages to bite Lila before Brad pushes him away. Then the group runs out of the corridor to finally reach a door that closes behind them, separating them from the monsters. The elevator works again, and Lila thinks she should not go, but Brad sends her with the group while he stays to retrieve the cure. The vampires manage to break down the door and follow through the other corridor to chase Brad, who finds Gray almost dead on the floor and ignores him. Meanwhile, the group reaches the first floor and Gilder wants to shoot Lila before she transforms, but Clark forbids it. Then Clark calls Nicole to inform her that Switzerland has found the vaccine for the avian flu. A guard finds the electrical lock manual, and Clark can now guide Nicole on how to manually activate the security panels. Nicole manages to open the doors only for Shauna to enter and send a message into Nicole's mind, asking why she was kind to her. Nicole explains that she truly wanted to be her friend because unlike other criminals, she is good. And Shauna admits that she does not completely like Tim's plans because he wants to kill innocents as well. Nicole is about to reach an agreement with Shauna, but at that moment Brad appears and shoots her, making her flee. After taking the cure, Brad and Nicole hide in Tim's cell shortly before being surrounded by the vampires. Meanwhile, Amy hears that Gilder is eager to blow up 4B, so she uses her powers to speak with Tim again, who explains that if the bomb explodes, his death will kill Amy as well. Then Anthony appears and says that blowing up the vampires along with Brad is the correct decision for the greater good. While Clark argues with Jonas and Gilder about what to do, Amy approaches the computer and activates the explosives, which will detonate in 2 minutes. The lights go out in 4B, and the vampires run to save themselves. One of the technicians finally finds an alternate exit, and Clark instructs Brad to break a nearby wall to locate a hidden panel. Then Nicole gives Brad the cure and tells him to leave without her, because she will stay to delay the approaching vampires with the gun. Brad runs through the tunnel, and Clark runs outside to lift the manhole cover, allowing Brad to escape just before the entire lower level explodes. Brad immediately takes the cure inside, and Jonas applies it to Lila to instantly stop the transformation. Clark and Gilder realize that Amy is still alive, which means Tim is also alive. Amy confirms that she can hear the vampires' minds, and Jonas looks out the window to see them coming out of the same sewer line after killing Clark's B-team. Tim appears in Jonas's mind and asks him to hand Amy over to him, or there will be consequences. After that, Clark begins to devise a plan to try to leave the facility safely. Jonas gives Brad the remaining cure and reminds him to keep Amy safe because Tim fears her and one day she will be strong enough to face him. Then the agents go out and begin shooting at the vampires to keep them back, giving Brad the chance to escape with Lila and Amy. A fierce battle begins, and one by one the agents are killed, while Clark is thrown against a tree and instantly paralyzed. Shauna finds him and uses her powers to enter his mind, offering to turn him into a vampire as well. While the trio crosses the forest, Tim grabs Amy and pushes her against a tree. However, Amy summons the Yellow Eyes to find him in his mind, where she shares her own blood with him. This makes Tim flee, and Amy returns to Brad and Lila so they can reach the road together. Lacey is waiting for them and hands over the car so they can escape safely, while she joins the fight at the facility. Lacey kills any agent who is about to transform and finds Jonas inside, who is considering taking his own life. Lacey does not allow it and points out that he can find redemption if he helps people. 1 month later, Lila, Brad, and Amy are living as a family in a safe house in the middle of Oregon. Using a radio, they follow the news and discover that vampires are slowly taking over the largest American cities, while the government tries to fight them with military forces, which is not working because every day there are more infected. During a trip to the market to get supplies, Lila wonders why no one has come to get the cure yet, and Brad questions whether there is still anyone left to do that. When they arrive at the store, Lila suddenly sees a body fall onto a car and notices a nearby vampire who, surprisingly, stares at her without attacking. Then Brad also sees it and shoots the vampire. When a neighbor comes out, he asks since when vampires started moving during the day. This man also has a map with all the points of origin of the vampires, and Brad realizes they are the hometowns of all the inmates, except Nevada, the place Shauna comes from. It is discovered that Clark and the agents have established a safe area there, and whenever local police are too harsh, Clark reminds them to give people a chance. The police have also captured a dangerous criminal who should not remain in the shelter, so Clark offers to take him to a proper prison. However, at night, Clark leaves the criminal in the trunk of the car and takes him to Shauna so she can feed. It is revealed that Nevada is a safe point because all this time Clark has been bringing bad people for Shauna to kill, keeping the hunger away from the innocent. Meanwhile, Jonas and Lacey go to the Global Health Federation outpost, trying to convince the leader to send someone to get the cure. The leader explains that resources are lacking and that it is too dangerous to travel, but points out that he has a vampire body in the basement, then asks Jonas to try to replicate the cure with fresh blood. Later, the leader asks Jonas to speak with world leaders to say that he is almost finishing a vaccine, only to discover that the American Center for Disease Control no longer exists. Thus, even if he completes the vaccine, they do not know how to distribute it. Jonas realizes that other countries will soon launch nuclear weapons against the United States to prevent the infection from leaving the country. Sometime later, Lila tells Brad that she believes no one will come, so she wants to join Doctors Without Borders because the vampire did not attack her that day. She thinks she may have something in her blood that helps. Brad does not like the idea, but allows it for the greater good. After that, Brad begins teaching Amy to defend herself and to use a bow, because he wants her to be prepared for whatever comes. The next time Clark brings a criminal to Shauna, she says it is the last time she will feed on his favors, because the deal is over. She is tired of living hidden and feels that she is just in another cell, but Clark once again refuses to join her. Hours later, a group of vampires arrives in Nevada to attack the shelter, and Clark goes looking for Shauna because he thinks she is the cause. Shauna stops him from shooting by explaining that it was Martinez, not her, who transformed those people, and the two end up becoming involved. Back to Amy, She contacts Tim and asks how many people he has killed. Tim replies that thousands, and Amy says she could never kill like that. Laughing, Tim tests the theory by bringing neighbor Bob and infecting him in the neck. Then Amy wakes up and finds Tim standing outside the house. The next morning, the neighbors go to the house to ask Brad if he has seen Bob. Amy says he is outside, and when the group opens the door, they find Bob with a severe wound on his neck. Bob does not want to become a monster and asks Brad to end it, but before Brad shoots, Bob completes the transformation and attacks him. From inside the house, Amy hears gunshots. Soon after, Brad enters, showing that he was bitten. The neighbors want to kill him, and Brad wants them to stop him as well, but Amy refuses. The fury makes her transform into a vampire and kill the two neighbors without remorse. After that, she applies the last injection of the cure to Brad before deciding that she needs to flee. The last thing she does is leave an apology note with the beloved book for Brad. While Amy runs through the forest, she sees planes arriving to drop nuclear bombs on all the major American cities, causing massive destruction, killing everything instantly within a 15-kilometer radius. 97 years later, the United States is a complete wasteland. There are still vampires feeding on animals, but Amy is also there and has not aged at all. While traveling, she uses the bow to kill vampires and prevent the infection from spreading even further.